Hello, thanks a lot for your time today. So my name is Noah Melhem. I am a senior system engineer in FireEye, based in Saudi. I am today going to walk you through an important phase of the attack lifecycle. It is where the risk and impact is about to propagate throughout your network and critical assets. And it is when you need urgently to explore any possible means to stop further damages from happening to your business operations. So our session for today will cover the lateral movement from multiple perspectives. So this is our agenda for today. We will at first introduce you to the lateral movement concept and where does it fit, where does it happen inside the attack lifecycle. And then we'll highlight the common techniques in the lateral movement and how can we mitigate them. And then finally, we'll walk you through a FireEye approach in tackling the lateral movement. So the worldwide research firms, including, of course, FireEye Mandiant, has identified the lateral movement happening in about 70% of the cyber attacks today. So an attacker, as you can see here, will try to exploit a vulnerability or use a compromised credentials to gain access to your environment. So it is very unlikely that this initial landing spot will give this attacker a direct access to what they want. Again, this is, as we said, this is just a weak spot that this attacker found in his way toward your environment, toward his crown jewels. Now, as we can see here, the danger is that this foothold that the attacker has just arrived within your environment can be used as a pivot point to obtain further privileges and to get more access, to get closer and closer to the more desirable assets that the attacker seeks. Here, the attacker, as we can see, has attempted to move through the system by acquiring more privileges or more privileged accounts to find other exploits, other weaknesses to achieve his goal. Now let's go over the attack lifecycle and see where and when the lateral movement is happening within this context. So an attacker will typically conduct initial recon. He will engage with the target system. He will try to gather information about the vulnerabilities because he's looking to exploit them and to get inside the network. And then he will get to the initial compromise. It is where the intrusion is happening. In this stage, the attacker has successfully identified a vulnerability at your system. He exploited that vulnerability and he carried out his attack. Establishing a foothold, the third stage here in the attack lifecycle. So once he's inside, he will set up his presence and he will use common methods to vacate his foothold. This will definitely help him hide from many investigative tools. At the privilege escalation phase, the attacker is trying to use the newly gained privileges to maybe steal confidential data, run administrative commands, or maybe deploy a malware, and maybe he potentially wants to do a serious damage to your operating system, to your server applications. Internal reconnaissance again. So he will try to discover devices at this stage. He will try to discover your environment, your endpoints, your servers, your network. He tried to gather information about usernames, about working groups, about shared resources. He tried to get more insights on the open ports and the remote hosts and a lot of other information related to your network. And then here we go with our part for today, the lateral movement. So at this stage, it is happening after gaining the initial access, okay? The attacker try here to move deeper into your network to search for sensitive data, or maybe he wants to acquire higher value assets. So after entering to the network, the attacker will try to maintain an ongoing access after the lateral movement. He will try to maintain an ongoing access by moving throughout the compromised environment, and to try to obtain increased privileges. He will try to utilize different tools to achieve that, definitely. So he will maybe at this stage as well try to impersonate legitimate users, valid accounts. They try to move throughout your network, your environment. So until he will try to do that until to get to his goal that he's seeking. Maintaining the presence. So the attacker here is around hiding his presence from the investigative tools. He'll try again to install variants of backdoors to get into your network to maintain his foothold, to hide himself from any protection or prevention tools that you have inside your environment. And completing the mission, of course, the adversary here will try to achieve his goal. He'll try to manipulate, to interrupt, to destroy your systems, and maybe to interrupt your availability or your business operations. So we just talked about when the lateral movement is happening. Now let's explore how lateral movement is happening. Now, as we can see here, there are common techniques used in the lateral movement, which the attacker or even a malware itself will definitely utilize to propagate throughout your network. We'll go through them one by one. We'll give an example on a publicly announced attack or incident used those techniques to move laterally within your environment. Okay, so the first technique is around exploitation of remote services. So adversaries will try to exploit remote service to gain unauthorized access to your internal systems. And of course, this is happening when the attacker takes the advantage of a programming error in a program or a service or in the operating system itself even. So why he's doing that? Because he wants to enable access to that remote system. How's that happening? At first, the attacker will need to determine if the remote system is vulnerable. And definitely this can be done by network service scanning. There are several well-known vulnerabilities in the common services that we know, like SMP, RDB, many other internal services like MySQL or web server services. So many of those services are vulnerable enough and will help the attacker to utilize those vulnerabilities to get inside your network. So one of the common attacks that have used this technique, basically, as we can see in the right side here, is NotPetya. Okay, so the main purpose of this malware was to destroy the data, to destroy the disk structures of the compromised systems. This is a form of ransomware. It can spread itself across the computer network using SMP version 1 vulnerability, as we can see here. It was first seen 2017. The second technique basically is around internal spear phishing. So the attacker in this technique will either control the user device by a previously installed malware, or it can be happening by compromising the account credentials of that user. So the adversaries will try to take advantage of a trusted internal email account to trick the target via phishing emails, which has a spear phishing attachment or a malicious link. So this is definitely to deliver either payload or to redirect those victims to an external site to capture credentials on those sites that are going to mimic the email logging interfaces for the organization and the target. So we can see that there are a lot of incidents have been noticed. Those incidents and attacks used this specific technique. One of them uh, is when the Syrian Electronic Army, SEA, has compromised email accounts of Associated Press News Corporation to steal account credentials. Once Associated Press learned about this attack, they began warning their employees of the threat. So the attacker again sent phishing emails mimicking the Associated Press IT department, and they were able to compromise even more accounts. So one of the accounts which has been compromised was their official Twitter account, as we can see here on the screen. So an announcement was done by their Twitter account. White House was bombed. President Obama was injured. So the same day, stock market were actually heavily impacted. Okay, and a couple of $1 billion were lost. So this is the second technique. The third technique is around lateral tool transfer. So in this technique, the adversary will try to copy files laterally between internal victims. This is definitely to support lateral movement using file sharing protocols like SMP for connected network shares, or maybe some other cases with authenticated connections like SMP or Windows admin shares. So we all know that without using the lateral movement technique and this specific technique, Sham'un had no chance to be that destructive. So this is, as we can see here, Sham'un execution flow. Okay, Sham'un basically used raw disk file erase tools to carry out the data wiping tasks. And it was propagating into the network by copying itself using SMB file shares, and it was utilizing the exact same technique that we're discussing here. Unfortunately, in one of the attacks, 35,000 devices were completely wiped using this specific technique. Remote service session hijacking. So here, one more technique around hijacking the existing sessions. Okay, it's not about creating a new session. So the attacker in this technique will take control of a pre-existing session. Okay, this session has a remote services enabled, and he will utilize that to move laterally within your environment. So what is happening in this technique? This is happening when the legitimate user, as we can see here, is logged in already to an RDB server or SSH server, and this server was already compromised by this attacker. And we know that when they are logged into that server, a session will be established between the client and the server, and the adversary will acquire these sessions and will carry out actions on the remote systems. So this is one of the techniques that was used by WannaCry, where attackers were enumerating the current desktop sessions, and they have tried to execute a malware on each session. That affected, as we can see here in the map, around 150 countries worldwide. One more technique, so remote services. And this technique, it's more about compromising valid accounts. Those accounts are privileged enough to conduct remote connections. So we're talking here about SSH, we're talking about RDB, we're talking about SMP. So FinTen is a financially motivated threat group. This threat group has targeted many organizations since 2013. This group uses stolen data exfiltrated from victims to snatch organizations. So this is, as you can see here, FinTen attack lifecycle. We can see the lateral movement part of it. They have used Splinter Rat and they use as well the RDP splinter route. Of course, they use it to compromise the accounts, and then they used RDP to move laterally. So this is also a critical technique. Another technique is around replication through the removable media. Now, this technique will help adversaries to target air-gap network. Some adversaries have a lot of interest in the air-gap network. So they could do that by copying a malware into a removable media and taking the advantage of the auto-run features when the media get inserted into the target system and execute a malware. So anti-worm is one of the attacks that has used this technique. This attack is basically designed to spread using USB drives. Our research firms have identified this malware. It was initially delivered by malicious links in the emails or using a drive-by downloads on a compromised websites. This malware aims basically to steal the user credentials to execute commands, to receive future updates from the attacker. So it will always check for removable devices present on the host. And when it checks that it is present, it will get like a list of 10 folders, as we can see here on the removable drive. It hides those 10 folders, and it will create a shortcut within the same name for each of them. And all those shortcuts are going to be pointing to a malware executable. Okay, so when the user click on one of those shortcuts to basically open what he think that this is a normal folder, he will be technically initiating the malware execution. So this is a critical technique when it comes to the air-gap network. Software deployment tools. This is also one of the destructive techniques in the lateral movement. So in this technique, the adversaries will move laterally by gaining access to third-party tools used for administration, for monitoring, for deployment, for patching, maybe within your environment. Now, we specifically talk about tools like SCCM, Altiris, PNC, HPS. So the access after compromising those tools may be used to move laterally to other systems to maybe gather information to cause a specific effect, such as wiping hard drives and old endpoints, for example. So one of the common attacks that had used this specific techniques is APT32. This is a common attack group that have utilized this technique in their attacks. So this group has targeted multiple private sector industries. They're targeting governments, they're targeting journalists. Mandiant team had responded to an active incident some time back. So the victim had this APT32 compromised their McAfee EPO, okay, and they managed to move laterally within the victim premises, and eventually they managed, unfortunately, to wipe 18,000 endpoints. So Mandiant, by that time, were able to track, to identify the APT32 attack lifecycle, as we can see here. This initially was started by an active MIME attachment, as you can see in the screenshot here. So immediately, the team has developed the required security content to detect and prevent this group from taking over other victims. So we will discuss now the last technique. Now, this is around using the alternate authentication material. Now, adversaries in this technique will try to use things like password hashes, Kerberos tickets to move laterally within the environment to basically bypass the normal authentication process. Now, after every successful authentication, as we know, password hashes are going to be generated by the target system. Those hashes are going to be cached somewhere in the target system, either in the memory or the disk. Now, those hashes will be definitely at risk uh, uh, for being stolen through credential access techniques. So those adversaries will be able to authenticate to systems without knowing even the plain text password. So those hashes, as we can see, will be at risk of being stolen in the target system. So the adversaries will be basically authenticating against those target systems without even knowing the password hashes. Now, we saw here in this example, a valid password hash for a valid account has been captured previously by an adversary. Those captured hashes were used with pass the hash technique to authenticate that adversary. Once authenticated, you would imagine them performing harmful actions for either local or remote systems. So now that was the last technique. Now let's talk how do we stop the malicious lateral movement attacks. So basically, I dedicated like 3 slides to address the lateral movement mitigations and decided to start counting from 0, since I thought those security tools that we see in the screen here are critical when it comes to stop the attacker from penetrating your defenses on a north-south traffic. But unfortunately, they got 0 value when it comes to protect your organization from any lateral movement techniques. As we know, lateral movement is there after the attacker penetrated your defenses. It is not an initial stage, it is an advanced stage. It is actually just right before the big impact. It's right before the exfiltration. It's right before the big leakage. So at this stage, we know that all these controls are unfortunately over. Firewalls, IPSs, web proxies, email gateway are just perimeter devices, can do nothing to stop the lateral movement. Now, as we are all looking today for a real vaccine, let's talk more about the real mitigations for the lateral movement. Now, network segmentation. In order to manage and control the interzone traffic communication within your network, you will need to properly segment your networks, your systems, to reduce the access to critical systems. You would need to architect solutions to isolate the critical functions, the critical resources within your network. Exploit protection. You definitely need to have capabilities to look after the behavior used during exploitation. So you can prevent and you can stop any malicious behavior. Hardening. Just disable the RDP and the SSH servers if it's not necessary, or disallow or restrict the removable media if it's not required for your business operations. Visibility to east-west traffic. Of course, you need to detect, you need to track the adversary actions from within your network. It's important to reduce the likelihood of the data exfiltration. Threat intelligence program. Yes, you need to develop a cyber threat intelligence to be aware on the latest lateral movement tactics, techniques, and procedures. And you definitely need to validate how ready you are today to defend against the lateral movement attacks. This is also important. Readiness validation. Some other mitigations basically are around enforcing the multi-factor authentication, especially for the remote services, which are specifically here around the VPN, okay? You need also to adopt a proper privilege account management. For example, minimize the permissions, minimize the access for the service accounts to limit the impact of the exploitation. User account management. Don't allow, for example, a domain user to be in a local administrator group in a multiple systems. Password policies. You need to be ready sometimes to respond to the SSH hijacking attacks. So you need to ensure that the SSH key pairs have strong passwords. Definitely encryption it's also important. You need to enforce the strong encryption against the sensitive internal communications. Vulnerability management. You need to identify all the potential vulnerable services. So these are generic best practices you will definitely need to follow to reduce, to stop the further impact for the lateral movements. So we talked about the mitigations. Now let's see how does FireEye tackle the lateral movement attacks. Now FireEye, as we can see in the photo here, has multiple pillars. We have the technology pillar, we have the services pillar, we have the intelligence pillar, validation, and cloud security pillar. So as we can see, all those pillars are working together. They are heavily enriching and strengthening the capabilities of each other. And this is definitely important for a proper visibility. This is important for a proper knowledge and a proper protection and detection capabilities. Now, to be honest, FireEye approach in tackling the lateral movement was pretty much holistic. So basically, FireEye will help you identify and track the lateral movement. FireEye will help you protect your assets against the lateral movement techniques. FireEye will help you validate your defenses against the lateral movement attacks. FireEye, in order to be proactive, in order to be aware and informed of the latest lateral movement tactics and techniques, it will help you to be informed, be aware, be proactive against all those techniques, tactics, and procedures used in the lateral movement. FireEye, again, at the end, will help you if, God forbid, you are compromised. We will definitely be there and help you recover and go back to your normal course of operations. So let's explore how do we do that in FireEye. Now, let's talk about identifying the lateral movement challenges and detecting them. Now, when it comes to the lateral movement identification, we have our solution we call a Smart Vision. So this solution will be there to address the common lateral movement challenges. So it is well designed to do that. So those challenges are basically on how do I detect a suspicious lateral transfer in my environment before any data that has been lost. So the second challenge is around if I got breached, how do I minimize malicious lateral movement attacks and prevent the further damage from happening to my organization. The third challenge is basically around visibility versus scalability. So as my network grows here, how do I gain visibility across the network segments in front of the key servers, in front of the key assets, in front of my crown jewels? So how Smart Vision is doing this? So Smart Vision as a solution is specifically designed to track any suspicious lateral movement of an attacker, of a malware, or maybe to detect a data exfiltration, as we can see. So when it comes to the attacker, Smart Vision will be detecting a privilege escalation, for example. If the attacker tried to pass the hash as an example, or maybe some tools like Mimikatz to escalate the privileges. Or maybe if he wants to try doing internal reconnaissance against other VLANs within your organization. So the smart vision as a solution is very much effective in detecting the lateral movement of the attacker. Now, smart vision as well can identify the malware as it moves to your network. So it's about the malware as well. So we will utilize our MVX technology to virtually execute all suspicious objects that are moving using SMB protocol, as an example. The smart vision will be also helpful during the data exfiltration phase. So during this phase, smart vision will detect any usual file transfer. Those file transfer could be associated with data theft. It will utilize to do that its machine learning modules and the data exfiltration modules. So when it comes to how do we deploy the smart vision, we can see here on the right side. So smart vision is typically installed behind the internal firewalls on the server-facing traffic. This will allow the sensors to capture the traffic between clients and servers or between the peer systems. This solution is flexible enough to support inline or out-of-band deployments. Now, in summary, as we can see, FireEye developed smart vision to give enterprises visibility into lateral threat actions. This specific solution had helped many businesses to stay secure when the threats go sideways. Now, let's explore another solution, FireEye, which is pretty much effective and critical in addressing lateral movement, the endpoint. So we discussed, responding to the lateral movement using smart vision, which is definitely crucial to tackle the attacks on the network side. But we all know that it gets really serious when the risk is there at your crown jewels, at your endpoints. So because it is really seriously happening and seriously impacting the organization, FireEye took it seriously as well. And here we go. Now, when it comes to the cybersecurity attacks, we know that it's not really about if those attacks are going to happen. It's more about when it's going to happen. So the Ajax is well designed to address the attack lifecycle, starting from initial compromise, establishing foothold, maintaining the presence, lateral movement, and all other attack lifecycle. Different capabilities, as we see here, are introduced in every attack phase. And of course, lateral movement is one of those phases. So we can see here in the lateral movement phase, we discussed one of the mitigations for the lateral movement is the exploit protection. So the Ajax has a powerful engine around the exploit protection. We call it exploit guard. It's a powerful feature. It can be utilized to prevent the lateral movement techniques, which are heavily depending on exploitation of services and tools. So again, in the same phase, we also can utilize another powerful engine around a real-time indicator of compromise. It can be pushed from FireEye, it can be pushed from Mandiant, it can be also your own rules. So we know that one of the common techniques that we just discussed is around compromising embedded accounts to log in to services which are specifically designed to accept remote services such as SSH and RDP. Now, this powerful module within the Ajax is pretty much crucial to simplify the investigation of the lateral movement when this adversary tries to traverse across your enterprise using valid accounts. How's that happening? This is being done by aggregating the historical Logon events, by aggregating the historical activities. It will provide a mechanism to monitor any new activity. This data is being visualized in a user interface. It is designed basically for analysis, for threat hunting as well. Now, as we can see in the right side here, the Logon tracker is basically going to provide you a graph interface for identification of the unique logons or irregular logons. This is also important to track those unique logons across your assets. So you have also the option to filter out on host names, on usernames, on protocol, and so forth. One of the most recent incidents which was published announced like a couple of weeks back. Now, one of the attacks has utilized this powerful feature, okay, and Mandy and team had responded to this incident, and they were able to track the attacker by using this specific module. Now, they were able to identify this attacker who was actually traversing throughout the network using valid accounts, as we can see in the screenshot here. Okay, so this is a pretty crucial and pretty cool module which help the investigators to, you know, track and identify the attacker when it's getting to a stage where it can compromise valid accounts for organizations. Now let's validate and assess our security posture. So we have Mandiant security validation. This is a powerful platform that will help you assess, will help you understand, will help you visualize how your defenses will perform against the lateral movement, tactics, and techniques. Now, you'll be measured against industrial frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK. This solution is also important to validate your network segmentation. So let's just go a bit deeper in this solution. We can see here, this platform will deploy actors within your security zones, different security zones, okay? So those actors will basically perform the role of the attacker or maybe the target, okay? Here's the attacker and here's the target. So in this case, we're looking for an attack outside in, but this could be definitely inside out. This also could be east-west. Any pair of actors can work together to test your controls for lateral movement. Now, these actors will attack each other. So basically, we're not going to attack your infrastructure. Mandiant security validation is going to attack itself. So we can test with the real attacks the same way the attacker would do. And eventually, this will help you to validate your security controls if they are ready today and if they are ready now to defend against real attacks, which has used lateral movement tactics and techniques. We're also using the same solution or map to 12 tactics of MITRE. So all the MITRE tactics and or underlying techniques are included in this solution, as you can see here. And the lateral movement is well presented. You can test your defenses against the lateral movement tactics at any time you want, anytime you need. You can see how effective are your security controls in responding to those attacks. Network segmentation. We just mentioned the network segmentation as the first mitigation techniques, real mitigation techniques for lateral movement. Now, this solution as well is pretty much helpful when it comes to validate your network segmentation. Now, once you log into Mandiant security validation, you will be taken to what we call the environment map. So this map will represent your security zones. It will represent the communication between those security zones. So white circles, as you can see here, are your zones. Okay, the black and white circles are the actors within those zones, okay? And once the communication started between the actors, lines will be drawn between those security zones, okay? And this will eventually represent the environment map for you. So this will definitely help organizations to identify which zones are communicating to which. For example, in this example, are you really expecting your enterprise desktop users to communicate with your DMZ servers? Okay, you can validate this expectation against your desired requirements. Okay, so FireEye threat intel. Now, talking about being proactive, being aware, being informed on the lateral movement attacks, tactics, and techniques, you definitely need to refer to the intelligence. And FireEye intelligence will combine adversary, victim, campaign information, product telemetry to finally produce actionable threat intelligence that no competitor in this market can actually match. Why we're saying this? Because apparently we have extensive years of experience in intelligence collection, intelligence analysis, intelligence consultation. We have around 170 research individuals across 22 countries. They are exposed to different communities, to different languages, to different cultures. We were recognized many times by many independent research firms as a leader, and some other occasions we were identified as the only leader. So organizations today are going to look to improve their security posture. They want to improve their response capabilities to ensure that their defenses are aligned today with the threats. And of course, the lateral movement is one of them. Now, they will ask questions like, what's going on around us, around our organizations? So whether our data has been compromised and it is currently available for someone else. How do I compare my peers to me in the same vertical? Tell me more about organizations like me, for example. So managed threat intelligence subscriptions will meet these challenges. And talking about lateral movement and intelligence, so with the intelligence subscription, you will get the full required visibility of the latest tactics, techniques, and procedures, and the actors as well, the threat actors, and definitely the lateral movement, of course, is included in this. You'll get the full details as well about the APT groups that are associated with the nation states. This, you will definitely have visibility on who they are, or, and what the tools that they are using as well. So the intelligence reports, we can see here, you will have an access for a comprehensive reports on the techniques, tactics, procedures involved in the lateral movements. For example, this report on the left side will discuss the organizational guideline for mitigation threats of the lateral movement, and will provide you comprehensive guidelines based on the industry standard recommendations. The middle one, the middle report, is around, for example, how APT-12 actors used a single victim workstation to create a base of operations to affect a third part in the environment. It will provide this report, these kind of reports will provide more details on the tactics, more details on the techniques that are being used during this stage of the attack. So, as we can see here, this is all about visibility. It's all about proactivity. It's more about being ready and informed on the latest lateral movement tactics and techniques. Mandiant team. So those guys has been in the front line since 2004. So they are responding to the most complex breaches worldwide, now before. So this team as well has an extensive years experience again, so 15 plus years from experience. So they have deep understanding for the existing threats, for the emerging threat actors. They have deep understanding of the tools and the tactics and the procedures that are being used for attacks, and of course, lateral movement as well. So they can help you recover to your normal course of operations if, God forbid, you are breached using one of the attacks that has used lateral movement techniques. Now, they help organizations to stop threat actors before, during, and after incidents where the impact was propagated inside the customer environment using lateral movement techniques. So that was all for today. And I want to thank you all for your time. And I hope that this session was informative for you all. And please don't hesitate to reach me out over my email in case you have any question or clarification on this. So thanks once again, and I wish you all a great day. Thank you.